thank you everyone for joining us today. Part of the purpose of today is really that obviously Westport is a project that's still in the planning phase. We're still pre-business case, and I'll touch a bit more on that in a minute. But we are obviously, there's a lot of interest out there in the market. It's completely understandable for a program this size, particularly as we look forward to some of the Metronet and other programs coming to conclusion. And there's a lot of people that want to come and speak to us about Westport, our plans going forwards, and so on and so forth, which is fantastic. And I really appreciate the help that everyone's provided and advice and guidance from the market and others. But we also have a substantial amount of work to get done in the next couple of months to get the business case resolved, plus some of the key work on front-end risks for the next stage. And we sort of thought it would be more effective for us to give a bit of an update to everyone, so everyone has the same information about where we're at. And then we'll probably go into our cocoons for a little while, for a couple of months, to get through the business case stage before sort of opening up again to talk with you guys in more detail about the next stage. I think it's really important that we reiterate where we're at. The business case is on track to be completed in the middle of this year, in July, to be handed into government. That's a phenomenal effort, I've got to say, by the team here in Westport and our program partners in Main Roads, PTA, FPA and others. As you know, we sort of started 12 to 18 months late because of COVID. Obviously, the attention of government was on the immediate. So to catch up and get this done, so we've got some certainty for everyone going forwards, has been a great effort for such a large-scale program. I appreciate it's only a business case, but we've had to go a fair bit beyond what we would normally do in this space to get to the information and the confidence that we have for government around cost, around impacts, around deliverability. So I'm really pleased as to where we've got to in this stage. The anticipated staging going forwards is we will provide that to government in the middle of this year. It'll go for both Infrastructure WA and IA assessment. Obviously IWA has set timelines, IA has a slightly different process, but we anticipate that government will be able to make a decision on the next phase in November as part of the mid-year review process, and that will then sort of allow us to keep going. And I'll touch back on the fact that the state budget has already provided for that, given the importance of this program, but obviously the commitment to the next stage will be reviewed and updated at the end of this year. What we talk about a little bit today is going into stage 4. So stage 4 for us, often, anyone who's familiar with the SAMP framework would understand that after business case in Western Australia, we move into project definition. I know Main Roads often refer to that as development stage. It's the same thing. And that's where we need to get ready for the procurement of the capital works program. For Westport, obviously, it's not just a project, it's a program of projects. And it's not just a project delivering a certain capacity or performance there. It's about whole supply chain working. So it's a lot more. Stage 4 is a lot more than just the definition of infrastructure projects, and I'll touch base on that a little bit more. But what we've planned for is stage 4 to take us through definition and delivery, and then stage 5 is where we'll talk about the transition to the new supply chain. But again, a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is indicative, and obviously on the assumption that government wants to move forwards. Government has choices around the next stage. They has choices around timing. They have choices around scope. They have choices around a whole range of things in relation to Westport. So what we wanted to do is to give you our best understanding. Our commitment has always been to have an open door with yourselves in industry to understand what our program's about and where it is, so you can undertake your own planning and thinking. But it's really important to understand that there is still a decision of government to go forwards, and what we're trying to do is hypothesise about what might happen afterwards, so we can all be on the similar page. As I said before, just to understand the stages of Westport and the way it's run, we've obviously loosely or as closely as possible tied it to Infrastructure Australia planning stages, not just because we want to engage with Infrastructure Australia, but just they're sensible. And of course, we have our state WA SAMP process as well. So obviously the strategic optioning was done and finished in 2020. We'll complete the business case in a couple of months. Stage 4 is definition and delivery, so that'll be definition of all of the public infrastructure, and then procurement and delivery of that after government makes the decisions on the PDPs. As anyone would understand in Western Australia, there is that final sort of quick tick. There will be the procurement of the private sector investment from stevedores or operators of on-dock rail and other things, which will have to happen as the terminal infrastructure comes to fruition. There's a lot of land assembly behind port, Commonwealth activities and developments that are required in around Western Trade Coast and otherwise to provide the materials, but also any logistics support for the port. A massive piece of work for the next stage will be the transition plan. So it is one thing to build infrastructure, it is another thing entirely to move an entire supply chain and industry, which is currently structured around a gateway in Fremantle all the way down to Kwinana, and to re-establish that industry and make sure it can work on day one. So the transition planning so that everyone is ready once the infrastructure is completed to pull the trigger and move is a substantial piece of work, and obviously extends well beyond just our work with stevedores and others, and into the full supply chain operations. And there's obviously a lot of work still around the social and environmental programs. These often are sort of sit there as a tacked on component of programs, but for us in Westport, we understand entirely that the key risks still facing Westport will be the deliverability in terms of environmental approvals and our ambition for nature positive, the social license that the community has for a major project like this on their doorstep, and then obviously the rest of the risks sort of trail from there. Stage 5 for us in terms of looking forwards is where we'll actually talk about the transition of the supply chain from Fremantle down to Kwinana, and then the transition to BAU, where all the assets are handed over to the long-term asset owners, the powers along with those, and any agreements and commercial agreements, the beginning of the decommissioning of Fremantle, and then ultimately the closure of the program, of the Westport program. Westport obviously is there to trigger and to guide through and sort of shepherd through one of the WA's largest infrastructure and non-infrastructure programs, but it is a temporary activity, and ultimately it'll need to return back to BAU. I always include this slide, and it continues to be critically important. We have used these goals, and I know most of you have heard me talk about the program previously and refer to these, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but these goals have had a material change in the program. Some people might sort of, who are not familiar with ports, might sort of say, oh, it's just shifted a bit, but some of these goals have driven us towards scale questions. They've driven us towards investing in scope which is larger than we may need in year one, simply because of the requirement for scalability and resilience in the supply chain. We've moved infrastructure significantly to have sort of a substantial environmental benefit. So all of these things are really important to where we've got to today, including the opportunity to scale back some infrastructure, make savings on what was formerly anticipated into more of a staged process. But these goals have been our guiding light. Now, obviously, these goals have been really suitable for the planning phase, for some of the big decisions we've had to make, the multi-criteria analysis processes that you run at this stage. And we will be looking at these and sort of saying, well, how do we need to update these for a definition and delivery program? It's really important that ourselves within the Westport office, our program partners in OMTID and Main Roads and PTA and delivery partners, and yourselves in terms of both the consultants or engineers working for us in definition or the contractors working for us in delivery, have a really clear understanding of the outcomes we're seeking to achieve, and a really clear understanding about how they will be measured and how successful we'll be measured as we go through the program. It's important that we bring this back to a clear and understandable set of goals, which is suitable for definition and delivery. And case in point, safety for workers in the community. At the moment, it talks about the operation, but safety as we move towards delivery and construction is going to be a massive part of the program going forwards. So we will look to review these and be releasing an updated set of goals late this year if government triggers the next stage. I'm sure you've all seen this, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but there is, I will always talk a lot about the non-infrastructure part of Westport, but we all know that the things with the many zeros and both in terms of cost and workforce and materials is going to be the infrastructure build. We are, again, the vision for us is to make sure we have a hyper efficient and future focused supply chain, and that supply chain will operate on infrastructure. So there will continue to be an interaction between infrastructure and the non-infrastructure side of things and optimization. But these are the large bits of kit that we need to build for the supply chain to work. So obviously, everyone's familiar with this. I'm not going to go through this in any great detail. But we will talk a little bit more now around some of the key packages. So how is that packaged up in terms of our packaging strategy going forwards? So on the non-infrastructure side, obviously there's a lot of strategy to deliver, but then it's actually the implementation of that strategy, both through works that need to happen alongside infrastructure, whether it be, with Noongar, the Ngalakala Budja or the Noongar people about setting up a Sea Ranger program, or training and workforce development activities, or whatever that might be, or innovation funding for certain activities in operations or digitisation. There will be a transition plan, as I've discussed, the major piece of work to make sure at the end of stage 4, we are actually ready to move, and everyone in the supply chain is ready for move, understands what they need to do, and is capable of doing that. Innovation and digitisation will be a crucial component going forwards. This program will finish in the, if you add stage 5 to it, you're going to be talking about the early 40s. It is absolutely essential that we don't start this program with a view to, we're going to do 2023 stuff in the late 30s, early 40s. We need to be thinking about the future. We need to be thinking about asset managers after this program finishes and what they're going to require. We need to be thinking about productivity for a build this big, so we can try and drive costs and productivity benefits to reduce the cost of the program to the state. So innovation will be crucially important in this program. There'll be a raft of policy and change that needs to be looked at. How, it's not just about buying lower carbon concrete. What are we going to do around the supply chain operations to see that full thing become net zero? How are we going to use policy and other changes to drive better performance, not just big expenditure on infrastructure? The opportunity to reduce some of that expenditure by policy change should be explored. And then, of course, there will be the restructuring of things like the Metropolitan Regional Scheme, the Cockburn Sound State Environment Policy, transport policy. There will be a range of changes that need to happen around the infrastructure to make sure this can actually be delivered and we can operate in an efficient way, and that we don't build infrastructure which is then constrained by regulation or land planning decisions or other activities. There's a lot of interface that we're going to have to manage, and this will be both in a strategic but also in an operational and very technical manner in the infrastructure. Obviously, there is the defence agenda, which is still emerging, and I don't think we have clarity about exactly what they're going to do when until later this year, but that will be operating alongside us to the north. There is the interaction with Water Corporation immediately that we're going to have to work through, but also with Western Power, who's trying to decarbonise the Western Trade Coast, and new tower systems, which seem to coexist with our road footprints and so on, that we're going to have to work through, aside from all the normal small utility interaction. We're going to be working very closely as a genuine joint venture or collaboration with FPA around the Kwinana bulk terminal. Obviously, we need to build the south side of our reclaimed area for that to be up and running by the 2030s, but there will obviously be the handling equipment and the landside activities that they will be undertaking. And as all of you probably understand, that the JETSI has been leading a global advanced industries hub strategy, looking at how the Western Trade Coast will evolve. There's 1,400 hectares of available land for heavy general industrial and then commercial activities in that area. And so the opportunity that provides in terms of the supply chain operations, but also how we all work together in the construction task in that area, so that we're not tripping over each other, we're not driving poor behaviour in terms of too much workforce concentration, too much materials concentration in the same place, and land assembly. In terms of the infrastructure, you would know Kwinana obviously, Anketel Road, and I'll skip through some of these in a bit more detail in terms of the land side and the marine. But obviously the Westport is not just about it's not about public transport or public roads. It's around a commercial supply chain which is operated by business. And so part of a substantial amount of work we'll be undertaking over the next couple of years is interacting with the stevedoring industry around bringing them on board at the appropriate time to help make sure our design suits their purposes in terms of when they're going to have to come along and build their terminals, the handling equipment and the operations, the on-dock rail and some of the hinterland logistics as well. So this is effectively the key work packages. Obviously the dollars are very large on the right-hand side and they're smaller on the left-hand side, but I continue to believe that stuff on the left-hand side is just as important in terms of delivering performance and outcomes for the economy of Western Australia, rather than just a big build program. In terms of the marine infrastructure program, so we are talking at scale here. I've had a number of you and others come in to talk to us, and the acknowledgement that this is a globally a global scale program, and I think that's that's valid. You don't often have the opportunity to build a new port from scratch, particularly to build something with the acknowledgement of scalability as a key goal, where we make sure that this is built to grow into the future, even if it just has the room to grow rather than built on day one. But there'll be substantial port facilities, tugboat harbours, empty container parks, road and rail connections. That last mile, the port precinct is very complicated. And obviously we're engaging with Commonwealth around border force and quarantine activities too. There's a substantial breakwater that needs to be built, and the technologies and the approach to that in terms of just granite versus granite and recycled versus caissons. There's still some work to do there depending on geotech. There's a substantial marine channel which has been really well positioned to avoid as much seagrass as possible. Obviously, we have zero seagrass impact in Cockburn Sound, which is fantastic, direct, I should say. Obviously, dredging will need to be managed very carefully in terms of plumes. And in the outer deep water channels, we are still having an impact, I think, below 2.5% on the seagrass that is out there as well. So that's a great achievement. And we have got a fairly good definition of what that channel needs to be, with a substantial amount of real-time simulations being run around that. Major dredging program, and obviously in terms of the packaging and the procurement model, we appreciate there's only several real companies around the place which are geared up to do the dredging of this scale, and so that's been factored into our consideration of ECI and other activities to make sure we get the right knowledge early in terms of how we're going to undertake that, and that works very closely with our final environmental management planning for dredging as well, so that we balance the environmental outcome with interface with the rest of the program. And obviously the replacement of the bulk terminal and preparing for private development. In terms of road infrastructure, as you know, the wide upgrading of Anketel Road to 4 lanes between Kwinana Freeway and Leith Road in Kwinana. So Leith Road is the very left-hand side level at-grade intersection you see on that diagram, just near the blue box, which is the container terminal. That area there's going to be a substantial amount of construction complexity in terms of how we do that in a way which supports the Kwinana industries which are operating on a day-to-day basis there. Beard Street immediately to the north is one of the only ways in and out of that pocket of industrial operations. So it's really important that we think about how we're going to work with industry in terms of their shift changes and et cetera and so on in developing this. There'll be a range of interchanges for key aspects, obviously the Rockingham Road and the Kwinana Freeway ones being the most substantial of those, and then intersections along Anketel Road. Obviously, as part of the announcement, we'll also be working towards protecting Anketel Road East. It has always been the plan and remains the plan that ultimately there will be a ring road effectively for heavy freight, which goes across Anketel and up Tonkin. But again, part of the work that we did in this stage is identify that there is a more cost-effective solution of using Kwinana and Roe if they are widened, which will also resolve a lot of congestion for car users in those areas as well. So multiple benefits from single projects with the long-term plan of building out Anketel East. Kwinana Freeway and Road, obviously for Kwinana between Thomas and Russell. And Roe, the substantial widening all the way to Orrong, which will be a major project, and the Road to Kwinana interchange. We'll obviously work also within definition with main roads, because there are other drivers for example, looking at whether the widening of Kwinana Freeway should be extended further to the south to achieve other upgrades in terms of just traffic management and congestion. And so part of the definition project we'll be looking at that in terms of, are there any other things we should be doing as part of this program for a more value and cost-effective solution for wider network upgrades. North Lake Road level crossing removal is obviously a very complicated level crossing, given the commercial, residential and environmental and groundwater constraints in that location. So that will be pulled out as its own package as well. In terms of rail, a new frail spur line from the main line all the way onto the dock effectively will be an interesting process, so complicated, nesting in with all the different road and road infrastructure in that location. There'll be the duplication of between Kwinana and the Coburn Triangle, and there is obviously some substantial, very important pipeline infrastructure sitting in that rail reserve, which is going to create complexity in terms of how we actually undertake that duplication. And obviously care will need to be taken in the top section where you are actually interfacing with residents as well. Most of that is obviously through the Lat 32 area, which is a great place to be building infrastructure, but to the north we will start to interface with people and populations. There will be duplication of sections up in Forestfield area, much shorter sections, and potential upgrades and spur lines to allow the operation of intermodal terminals in that central east industrial area where most containers go to be unpacked or packed. And there will be 3 of the smaller level crossing removal projects will be included in this rail package rather than is in their own packages like North Lake Road. So in terms of how we're going to sort of approach this, it is, there's about 16 packages of work. These, when we look at the actual procurement model, there will be opportunities to consider some of the bundling of those a bit further or not, particularly the marine side. We've obviously been listening and learning from all of you and others in industry about the opportunities and to make sure that there is work for everyone across the supply chain. It's not just everything's not too bundled, and that obviously industry sustainability will be a key factor in our final procurement strategy. But I think effectively one of the things we're going to do in stage 2, if government supports moving forwards, is to make sure we don't lose the programmatic approach to this. So Westport, across the 15 packages is a very large program. It won't consume everything. If we think about, we had a $5 billion a year program up until now. Before COVID, we were at $3.5 billion a year. The land side will not consume all of OMTID's effort. There will be a lot of other roads and rail projects that need to be delivered just in accordance with the AIP. But you combine it all together and there is a lot of opportunity. If we manage this well, we can actually affect some good value and some good change. So Westport will be will carry through with the likely development of a Westport Development Authority towards the end of next year, and that will have overall responsibility for delivery of the program. And what we want to try and achieve through a genuine program management approach, not just reporting on a range of projects, is that we can actually make sure that there's that maintenance of that system performance, the whole supply chain, any scope decisions or change decisions in any of these smaller projects, that we can look at the effect of how that's going to change the performance of the whole supply chain and have some control over those to make sure things will work well. It's important that at a program, we can look at the phasing and staging of each deployment of each project. We need to balance certainty for industry with also the fact that while Westport is big, there will be other projects. There's going to be defence, there's going to be desal plants, there's going to be other road projects. And we need to make sure that we can manage, the flow of materials and workforce and resources across all of these programs so we don't end up with unsustainable peaks and unnecessary escalation by making some program decisions. And again, making sure that there's good scope control across the whole program so that while infrastructure is developed for multiple purposes, particularly in the land side, not just Westport, is that the performance that we articulated and we built into the business case is enhanced rather than compromised. Second reason for program management for us is again, as I said, that optimization of materials, workforce, interfaces and innovation across the whole supply chain is making sure we make the right decisions, and make sure that we can actually, collectively buy products, if you like. The purchasing power of Westport as a program is substantial, and the way we can give certainty to materials and suppliers in terms of this is what's going to be required for Westport as a whole over this duration, of this 10, 12-year duration, might allow us to work with industry to give them confidence to invest in new technologies and new processes and new approaches that can help us achieve some of our wider goals as part of the program. And finally, in terms of program management, the real opportunity to share excellence. Excellence in terms of, project directors, whether it be in OMTID or Westport or elsewhere, but also excellence from yourselves in how we're undertaking work within each of these projects, and make sure that excellence is shared across the full program and up to the top, so we can take advantage of it. So program management by Westport. Westport will lead the non-infrastructure components. OMTID will lead the landside infrastructure sub-program. And obviously OMTID including main roads and PTA. on main roads and PTA obviously being the standards owners as well, and the asset owners that will be operating this into the long term. That's obviously a sensible pathway. The marine infrastructure program, at this stage we're planning on Westport leading that with a technical advisor, which I'll come back to, and an integrated delivery partner to support us in terms of securing the right capability for each of those marine work packages. ECI will likely feature in this, particularly for dredging. There's a couple of different methodologies emerging that we need to test, but even for some of the wider marine infrastructure, that might be necessary as well. And then in terms of the private infrastructure, Westport will lead the agreements with those operators in the long term. Obviously with stevedores and on-dock rail, that'll be done in absolute partnership with FPA, and then, Fremantle Ports Authority, I should say. Whether it's intermodal terminals or logistics, that would probably be done in partnership with PTA if they're the leaseholder, etc., and so on. But there'll be a substantial amount of work in terms of setting up the right commercial and lease arrangements so that operators can come on with confidence that they can invest substantially in new infrastructure and new handling equipment, with the confidence they will be able to recover those costs over the long term. So in terms of the work packages, this is just delivery, what we had written before. As you can see, the different categories and who would be overseeing those within the overarching Westport program management sphere. So it's just recutting what I said before. I'm happy to come back to this. In terms of an indicative early schedule, I'm going to ask you all to not hold us to this. This is information we sort of ummed and ahed about sort of sharing with you, and we've only indicated the first 5 years. Really just to talk about the fact that our priority at the moment and for the next 4 years will be getting all of the definition done for as much of the program as we can possibly do, so the government can make final investment decisions through the PDPs over the next 4 years. Obviously, our priority at the moment is to get the environmental approvals through, both for Anketel Road but also for the marine development. We do have some schedule challenges early on around geotech information for EIA. Geotech has been delayed a little bit because of Aboriginal heritage requirements. So we do have a challenging first couple of years in terms of managing the schedule, but for yourselves, the expectation for us is that we will soon, Main Roads will soon be releasing early tender advice around Anketel and freeway projects for an integrated project team. Those should be coming out in the next couple of weeks, actually. And that's really important because we need to get on with the definition for those roads. There's a huge amount of call out for Kwinana for obvious reasons around other congestion. Anketel Road is one of the highest priority for industry in the Western Trade Coast anyway, even without Westport. Plus, we need Anketel Road to be built so we can access the coast in a way which will not disrupt industry, which is trying to operate and build new infrastructure in that location as well. As I said, there's only really 2 roads coming in and out of that location, and they're already highly congested. So we need to get those roads done early, and that's why we are going out in front of business case just around Anketel and the freeways for definition, supporting the definition of those activities. Anketel will probably be the first component. Anketel and Kwinana will be the first components built. Roe in terms of, we'll look at Roe. In terms of the port side of things, there's an enabling works bar there in terms of delivery. This will probably start quite small. This is around sort of some of organising the port precinct for construction. This might be about sort of understanding where quarries or where BRM or other materials need to come from and doing some of those works. So it'll probably be smaller packages of work in the 25s and 26s rather than the major works requiring environmental approvals and other activities. We'll be undertaking definition around both the marine works in concert with the KBT. Kwinana Bulk Terminal, again, is one of the non-negotiables and the crucial activities that we need to see done as part of Westport, irrespective of government's decisions about the final time for the container terminal. We must have a Kwinana Bulk Terminal up in the early 2030s, because obviously this is the only way all of us get our concrete clinker, our cement clinker and other core building materials. So all I wanted to put this up here is to understand that there is some schedule challenges and environmental approvals that we need to focus on. The second thing is we want to try and get all, if not the vast majority of all definition done in the next 4 years. so that we have absolute certainty about what's going to be, how we're going to procure, and everything that needs to be done. We can get the materials organised, we can get the workforce organised, we can get everything ready for the construction process, and we're not trying to deliver on top of definition, which I think we've learned some lessons about the challenges in doing that. And then obviously government will make decisions about the future in terms of the ultimate timelines. I think it's really important as we talk through this that we don't, all of us, sort of just lift the heads a little bit and make sure that we don't sort of say, congratulate ourselves. We should congratulate ourselves for excellent delivery and projects that we're doing right now. There's obviously some fantastic outcomes and some fantastic examples of what's been done, but we are delivering a project. We're talking about projects that will deliver in the 2030s today. And so it's really important that we don't lose track of the fact that we want 2030s approaches built into our procurement models, but also your response to us to make sure that we maintain our future focus and we maintain our focus on those Westport goals. So whether it's digitisation, whether it's about sort of workforce and women in the workforce, or making sure that we've got a skilled workforce ready to go when we get to construction. We've had a lot of great feedback from a number of you in the CCA, CCF and others in terms of preparing workforces. We've again had a lot of input from you guys around resource efficiency and opportunities to do things better. And net zero is obviously going to be a key priority for us going forwards as humanity really, but certainly as a state while we develop this program. The scale of Westport means that, and the buying power of the collective program means that it presents a pretty unique opportunity for us to look at these things with you and say, well, how are we going to maximise these outcomes as we go through this large program? And it's really important that I guess yourselves understand that whether it be Main Roads or PTA through OMTID, or whether it be us individually, is that we will be looking for you to sort of be talking back to us about how you feel that we can actually achieve these in terms of a 2030s lens rather than a 2023 lens. So just quickly, in terms of the 24-25 budget, so the monies have been handed down. So this is, and obviously the Commonwealth has also added to this. So there is funds there to begin the work around project definition and early marine, civil and roadworks. We will be able to maintain the Westport office. I think the lesson was learned about sort of just closing down office and having to restart it. You lose a lot of time. So it's maintaining the office so we can continue our work. And then obviously government can make its decision at the end of this year about what it wants to do next. But given some of the pressures around Anketel and Kwinana Bulk Terminal and other things, my assumption is that there will obviously be a continuation in some way, shape or form, if not go ahead and build it quickly. We are going to have to extend some of the existing technical work. So geotech, there's a number of smaller challenges and uncertainties that are still sort of hanging around at the end of business case, as you'd anticipate, but we need to sort of knock some of those at the head right now to actually be able to make sure that our definition is sufficiently focused. So we're extending some of our works for the next sort of 6 to 12 months just to help us across that time until such time as we have the opportunity to bring on a new technical advisor, or to go to the market and bring on a technical advisor for the next stage. We are doing the work internally, although our focus is on the business case at the moment. We're starting to turn the handle on a really clear program plan, nested down to project plans for all these activities, so that if government decides to pull the trigger and we can actually transition from stage 3 to stage 4 in about November, December this year with a really clear understanding of what we're doing and what we need you guys to do as part of that program. And obviously to maintain the flow of information up to government and to stakeholders, including yourselves, about what we're doing. So that was really important. And I think the government's invested in Westport just so we can start to engage with you in good faith, and you have some confidence that when we do come to you early, with early market advice, which may be before the business case or even before Christmas, is that there's money in the bank there to actually sort of support that, and you can engage in that safely. So the next stage is for us. We will have early tender advice for project definition for Anketel and Kwinana coming out shortly, end of this month, followed by an RFP in June. We will submit the business case in mid-2024 in July. We expect a decision on the business case late Q3, so probably around sort of end of October, early November. It is around about the same time, potentially, early tender advice may come out before, depending on where government's at, or it may come out after, around securing technical advisors for the marine side of things and support for an integrated delivery partner for marine as well. And we are very cognizant, I should say, in all of this that, following November, we have Christmas, and we don't really want you guys and your teams having to, do an awful lot of work across Christmas. It's not healthy for anyone. And then obviously we're going to go into elections, so we need to manage that process carefully. So we're not doing things we shouldn't in caretaker, but also we're not asking your staff and my staff to work too much over Christmas, and everyone can have a bit of a break after a fairly torrid half decade. And at the moment, the plan is then, the key, one of the key deliverables going forwards will be the submission of the proposal to the EPA in 2025, and some of the timing of that in terms of mid towards end 2025 will, in some respects, be driven by some of the geotech guidelines, timelines we're looking at the moment. So look, that's really most of what I wanted to say, and happy to have any questions, answer any questions to the area, to the level I can. Our procurement approach in terms of, bedding down some of these packaging and procurement strategies will evolve as we do the detailed planning over the next 6 months to stage 4. We've completed our commercial framework, which obviously gives us key guidelines in that. One of the things I probably should have said, and in our procurement and approach would be, we are starting with almost all of these packages with the aim of getting to the stage where we can go for a D&C contract at the end of definition. There has been obviously substantial time pressures on a lot of the big projects which have come out over the last sort of 5-6 years, and that's driven by, COVID and other activities, and sort of stimulus payments. We have the time in this program to do definition properly, to work with, good designers, good engineers, and also bring forward the experience of contractors into that process, so we can actually really get definition done well and resolve a lot of those issues. However, some of the locations, particularly as you get down to around the port, are very complex, and obviously some of the interfaces in the marine infrastructure are very complex as well, and it may mean that we do eventually go down the alliance or other related pathway. But we are starting with the intent of reaching being able to sort of award D&Cs ultimately after the definition phase. And we have heard from you about sort of, the benefits of that relational contracting model, and we're certainly not being, not ignoring that. But again, I think if we all work together in terms of good project definition, then it provides a lot more. We should be able to get to the point of having a lot more clarity for contractors in that next stage. So as I said, keep an eye on Tenders WA for some of the key bits around Anketel Road and otherwise. There will be smaller projects coming out in terms of assisting us with some of the planning for the next stage. They'll either go through Tenders WA or some of our panels. And if you are not registered for some of that procurement advice, then please do so we can make sure the information comes out to you as we go forwards. All right, that's enough from me, and I'm happy now. Luke, would you like me to stop sharing? And
yeah, that's fine. Happy for you to stop sharing. Just encourage everyone, if you've got some questions, use the chat function and send some through. There's a couple that are coming through already. I guess the first one, Pat, was just around port enabling works starting in 2025. And the question around what does that include, if you're able to extrapolate?
Yeah, look, we're working through that at the moment, to be honest. So what we understand is that there is going to have to be staging of materials near the port. We're going to have to develop access to the port, which is not necessarily part of the main Anketel Road project. There's going to be activities that we need to do to support some of the interfaces with Water Corporation, and some of the works we need to do to work with some of the companies and industries which are currently there, and we're going to have to work with them to move out of the way. So there's a fair bit of sort of, I would suggest, smaller activities, and we'll come out with some further advice on what those are. But we're just currently working with a lot of the different either landowners and GTEs and governments and agencies in that space to understand specifically what needs to be done to I guess, give us access to a location so we can build. The other component of that as well will be actually some of the long lead time materials and some of the long lead time activities we need to undertake now, such as rock creation, if we're going to go for large rock breakwaters and so on, and how we can create staging locations and other things in that port precinct for development. Other activities there may also relate to existing infrastructure, where people call this a greenfields port, but it's obviously a fairly detailed, fairly complicated site as it is. So there's maybe existing pipelines for industry or utilities that needs some movement to allow us to get access to site, or some local road rearrangements as well that are required in that area ahead of Anketel Road. So we'll come out, as I said, in a couple of months and give a bit more definition to that.
There's a question about the rail components and whether PTA will be responsible for those.
Yeah, so PTA is obviously the asset owner, and so at the moment the anticipation is that OMTID will develop that, obviously in close collaboration with ARC Infrastructure. And so particularly as we go through the definition phase, that is the intent. Obviously, when you have those sort of commercial relationships and long-term lease arrangements with ARC Infrastructure, some of those aspects will be in review until we finish the definition phase. But at the moment, it is anticipated that PTA will be leading at least the definition activity of those processes and likely the delivery as well through OMTID.
And the 16 works packages that were mentioned, I guess, how much visibility do we have on the details of those scopes?
Right now, you don't have much at all. So obviously, each of those packages have got a scope, an outline scope, which has come through from the system design project that we've undertaken over the last 18 or last 2 years. So obviously we've got between 5 and 15% design on most of those packages, depending on risk, as part of informing the business case and the proper cost modelling and risk modelling that we needed to undertake to come up with a robust forecast of not just cost, but also how these things would be built. There is a couple of those packages, particularly around that port precinct and around the marine infrastructure and some of the choices between, in terms of quay wall design, where there is the opportunity that, given some of the geotech information, we could open up a few of those questions and just have a look at, is there the opportunity to optimise them? But ultimately, Main Roads, as part of the SCID process, came up with a concept design for Anketel, and that would be included and provided to the integrated project team, which is being procured at the moment. When we get to the government making a final decision on the program, and again, the detailed program plan for the next phase, we'll start to release some of those packages of information as part of early tender advice or otherwise, so people can get their heads around it before we get to the procurement process for definition of them.
For the geotech work, how is that going to be procured? The question is, will it be a panel or will it be a public tender? Do we have that information at this point?
We do, but I'm going to beg that I don't have it to hand. So we will. I think we're working through that procurement model right now, and there are some different things that we need to consider in that space. So I know Adrian and the team are currently working through that into the procurement model, and we'll hopefully get some advice out to that sooner rather than later.
Have we considered other activities for the port, such as offshore wind?
Yeah, look, the port, very early on in stage 3, we looked at expanding the port footprint to become a multi-purpose port. But ultimately, again, going back to those goals, saying we wanted to be a sustainable project and all of those aspects, is in terms of the berths that we would require, particularly some of these non-container trades, be it offshore wind and otherwise, and be it scrap metal, be it ro-ro, whatever. The quantum of berth space you'd require in 2075, if you like, if we were trying to forecast some of these trades going there, would just be extraordinary. It would be actually bigger than the container terminal, and it would have really, for my money, made it undeliverable. And that's really what we looked into and sort of said, would this be approvable from an EPA perspective? Would it be deliverable? And the answer is probably no, and that's why we haven't really duplicated that port footprint. to facilitate those other trades. The other thing, obviously, with offshore wind is the road network behind it is incredibly important. And you see what's happening in the Pilbara now with Main Roads and Pilbara Ports Authority having to restructure roads in a really complicated changes in a much more remote area than the Western Trade Coast to be able to get that sort of infrastructure on and off the port. It just really isn't going to work in this location.
There's another question, Pat. Will FPA, is the intent that FPA will operate the new port facilities?
Yes, it is.
Will Westport be setting up standardised technology for all stakeholders to utilise from the outset?
Yes, to an extent. So things we're looking at right now, and as I said, there is planning going to stage 4. But some of our thinking is, from the program management side, is like what are the consistent approaches to digital engineering? What are the consistent approaches to program management and reporting and access to schedules and KPIs around workforce and all of those sort of things? We'll be looking at that. The digital engineering, as I said, and then everything on top of that, we're looking at that right now in terms of what we would like to see, particularly in terms of what we'd like to be able to hand over to the asset owners at the end of this. But we're also trying to balance that with, is it the right thing for the Westport office to, suddenly create a sort of digital engineering team here, or is it better for us to come with a framework of this is what we want to see from yourselves and others as you partake in the program, and then for yourselves to sort of say, okay, within that framework, so it's all interoperable and data can move around and be shared. This is how we would play into that space, and that allows us to look across all the different projects and say, well, this is a really excellent approach. Maybe we do want to standardise that across the program. So that's in terms of some of the digital engineering and data management. There's been some exceptional work done, I've got to say, in the marine science space, where with Azure and Microsoft and some of these organisations, they have transferred multiple modelling functions into the cloud and turned 3 to 4 month modelling exercises into 2-day modelling exercises. With some real innovation in that space. And I'd love to see some of that stuff be transferred across into the transport space as well. And then in terms of other technology, as I said, when we start to think about technology for productivity and net zero in construction, again, that programmatic approach would hopefully allow us to sort of look at the best in breed, if I could say, that's coming from yourselves, in terms of this are the suggestions and how we might do that, and make sure that those best approaches are adopted across the whole program. So it's a bit of a rigmarole answer, but sort of some standardisation, but also making sure that delivery is done by the people best able to do it, rather than to try and centralise everything in the Westport Program Office.
Pat, there was a question about the integrated project team, whether you could expand on the envisaged composition of that team.
So this is something we're doing a fair bit of work in right now. Ultimately, what we have obviously some excellent capability and experience and knowledge in landside civils. In OMTID and within industry, because this is something we do regularly. We have a number of specialist advisors, so people that have been burned from programs around the world, and they continue to advise us, and they and others have sort of outlined that marine civils and marine activities is just a different beast from the land side, even to the commercials and how those are procured. So in terms of the IDP, rather than just handballing the entire operation to a managing contractor or even a heavy IDP, which you've seen in some situations, for example, Western Sydney Airport, I think Bechtel's taken on a major role in that space. What we're cognizant of is that Cockburn Sound is an incredibly important part of Western Australia to Western Australians. We've learned lessons from globally people running IDPs and nationally people running IDPs about where they've succeeded and where they haven't succeeded as much. And so we're trying to build a construct here where we are able to use an integrated delivery partner to build in the capability that we don't have, and to be able to go out to the market and procure those contractors in the right way with the right procurement models and commercial models that we are going to get success. But also that we can blend those teams with public servants from the Westport Program Office or specialty consultants to make sure that at the end of this program, we end up with some capability in marine infrastructure, because I think there's an understanding that while Westport is very large, there's a lot of other port work that needs to be done around Western Australia, and we need to start to build that capability. So in some respects, we're going for a sort of a lighter model than has been seen in some of the integrated delivery partners over East, where we sort of bring in capability, we establish key leadership and technical roles that we don't have in Western Australia, but we also allow our staff to work in those teams to procure the contracting services, and we also allow the experts in OMTIP, which understand our procurement models and our procurement environment in Western Australia really well, to work in those teams as well. So it's going to be a little bit of a sort of a more about what capability we need to deliver the marine stuff and what we actually need to buy in.
Thanks, Pat. I think just to clarify, you've provided some information there about the integrated delivery team, so the IDP, which does get confusing because there's also the integrated project team. Are you able to provide some information about the IPT as well, the project team?
Yeah, look, to an extent, I think there's tender advices coming out pretty soon. So I might just leave some of the comments to a briefing that will be held, run by Dom Porrick, as that information comes to market in the next week, and then they'll be able to break down in part of that early market advice in probably next week or so, and then there'll be a couple. I think there's a month or a couple of months until the RFP goes out, so people will be able to ask their questions there.
Another question, is policy being developed to encourage and support Australian industry capability from both a manufacturing and fabrication perspective as a priority over import?
Look, I think there's a lot of policy. If you look at the Commonwealth policy recently about, I think it was called Build Australia or whatever it might have been. So there is obviously the Diversify WA policy within Western Australia to try and diversify our economy, and the national government, Commonwealth government, also has a policy to try and build more things in Australia. But I think the reality is that you are not going to see a dramatic sort of shift, which would, if I could put it bluntly, you're not going to suddenly see a shift which would again defer the need for a new port by 20, 25, 30 years. The establishment of the re-establishment of a manufacturing sector in WA or in Australia is a really long and really complex challenge. So we will continue to plan on the assumption of our trade forecasts, which have been updated since stage 2 and actually reduced in terms of the anticipated trade going forwards. So we're not being too bullish in terms of those aspects. And we'll obviously, as part of the definition phase, by the time we get to the end of that, have a look at the situation of the economy and understand, what has actually changed in that trade forecast before we pull the trigger on construction as well. So yeah, I think there is national and state policy looking diversifying our economy, but the advice we've been having from the state and the Commonwealth is that it doesn't really turn the dial on our expected imports and exports.
There's another question about the integrated project team, which I suspect will get answered in the next few weeks. So I think we can probably leave that one. It's whether Kwinana and Anketel will be separate or whether they'll be one project. So I think that question will get answered in the coming weeks as more information is available through that procurement process. Pat, I'm just thinking it might be helpful if we can paint a picture. You've mentioned earlier that we're not really in a position to be providing ongoing briefings to industry at this point. We really need to just keep our heads down and get this business case done. Are you able to speak to when industry can expect to hear from us again?
Yeah, indeed. So look, and again, guys, I'm sort of asking for your patience really now. So the team has done an awful amount of work to get us to where we are with the business case. But as you can imagine, something this complicated at the same time as thinking about the next stage is a real juggling act. And just in terms of making sure everyone comes out of this sane, we just need to sort of buckle down and focus on what's the immediate requirements. I mean, obviously, if we don't get the business case done on time, then all this work just gets pushed to the right. So it's what we've been doing is we've had a very open door. We've sort of invited everyone in to come and talk to us at whatever point, and some of that's been really useful for us. But I think just over the next 2 or 3 months, we really need to buckle down and do the work we need to do. There will be briefings on any procurement which comes out, for example, the IPT for the roads projects, where everyone will be able to get involved in that again. But probably in the next sort of 3 months, we just need to focus on the business case and getting the first elements of the stage 4 program plan together, so that next time we meet, we can actually give much more certainty around the scope of each package and how they'll be undertaken, rather than just a general briefing. So we'll probably just be sort of asking people to sort of be patient with us, and if people want to meet, we might just sort of say, look, we'll just kick it down the road by a couple of months if that's okay. Notwithstanding the fact at the same time, we may also be asking some of you to come in and help us with some of the strategy work around net zero or working efficiency as well. So we're being a bit selfish here, but just asking for the patience from the market at this stage.
Thanks, Pat. Look, I think we're sort of spot on timing. So I think unless there's any final questions that people want to throw in the chat, we'll wrap it up there. All right.
And so I was just going to say, I saw something about it. Does it have bipartisan support? I think there's both a state and a federal election next year, so we'll all watch that with interest. Thanks, everyone.